So remember when I was saying that, when you set up these independent, non-partisan bodies, what you're doing is you're putting the policy up for sale, um, and what you're doing is you're removing any kind of oversight that you have and replacing it with what is really just balls out corruption. Lawyer appointed to government panel is liberal donor. So one of the people that ended up on this independent, nonpartisan body, he donated $20,000 to the liberals. He's a lawyer. Apparently with some connections to the oil industry. It's outrageous. And you listen to the language that they use. We're going to set up an independent, nonpartisan body to ensure that there are no more backroom deals. It's outrageous. The backroom deals can only happen when you remove the oversight. And you remove the oversight by putting decision making in the power of these independent, nonpartisan bodies. If you let the civil service make those decisions, then everything would be very transparent, audited, and made by professionals, right? What the fuck is a lawyer doing on an environmental assessment panel? He's a fucking lawyer. An environmental assessment panel should be full of environmental scientists that have the background to do an environmental assessment. When do lawyers take courses in environmental science? But then again, when do drama teachers take lessons in good governance, right? Now, I've read the article. It's just parroting a Tory attack line. And as usual, the Tories are clueless, okay? Or at least they're pretending to be. They're pushing the same stupid right-wing trash about the independence of the board, okay? It's just your typical right-wing bloviating nonsense. The problem here is the independence of the board. Okay, if we had less independence, we would have more oversight. What does independence mean? It means independent of oversight. You're not independent of influence. That's what bipartisan means. Bipartisan means that there's a consensus, which means that the influence is the strongest. There's less corporate influence when you have partisan politics, because that indicates that somebody's bought and somebody isn't. When both sides agree with each other, that's because they're both bought by the same powers. Otherwise, they wouldn't. Even the simplest thing, they would argue about because it's about power. If we had less independence, we would have more oversight. Now, what's happening would be essentially impossible. In fact, the system was designed that way. And so the point of setting up an independent advisory board is to jump the system. Is to escape the system that's designed to prevent that kind of corruption. You can just put any lobbyist on it you want. You can just pluck someone from Exxon and put them on your environmental council. There's no public service to get in the way. It's an independent advisory board, with members determined arbitrarily by the Prime Minister. Anyone at all that wants to write a big enough check. But if you left the process inside of government, then you'd have to put a public servant in charge that is either elected or promoted. Probably promoted. And so when they say independence, what that means is the removal of oversight. Independent from auditing processes. And making corruption easier. It's not even the money that's the problem, okay? It's the fact that they're selling off the seat at the table. It's politics, it's capitalism, there's money anywhere, everywhere, whatever, okay? That's not the problem. The problem is that the consequences of the influence peddling. When you put a lawyer on an environmental board, they are themselves doing the work of their clients. So the lawyer gives a bunch of money to the party to get on the board. The lawyer's getting 10 times that from their clients, corporate interests. And considering it's an environmental board, you don't have to read the article to know who that is. Again, oil and gas interests. Now sure, you can argue this is how government works, and I'm actually going to agree with you, like I say, to an extent. There's lines, okay? This is how they're going to pick the next Supreme Court justice. They set up a body stacked with cronies, okay? Cronies and conservatives, of all things. And they're going to do the work of their clients, and they're going to put a stooge on the bench. And we'll never know how it happened because they set up a body that's outside of the oversight of the system. It's outrageous. In Canada, we actually solved this problem. This isn't a problem. Up until a few months ago, we really didn't have this problem. Because we understood that in order to minimize corruption, the board should be run by career civil servants. And says who? Says the guy that wrote the guy that designed the system. His name is Pierre Elliott Trudeau. It was the major thrust of his government, the central aspect of his governing philosophy and of his political theory. And it only took months for his dipshit son to throw it all out the window. But how can you blame him? He's a fool. You cannot blame a fool for being a fool. If a fool was less than a fool, then he wouldn't be a fool, would he? You have to blame the party. That's why I again call on the party to send him on vacation. Bring him back when you've got to get people to vote for him. Although let's not pretend that he did a good job with that either. It worked, but you finally picked someone who wasn't a war criminal. Or, I liked Dion, but he was kind of doddering. All he had to be was halfway competent and not Stephen Harper, right? The actual truth is that Justin Trudeau should not be that hard to replace with somebody who can win elections that easily. They just have to be halfway competent, okay? Not a war criminal, and not Stephen Harper. And the ghost of Stephen Harper will be around for a few cycles. We still vote against the ghost of Mike Harris in Ontario. Still. And in fact, in the next election, we will likely still be voting against the ghost of Mike Harris. Still. The system of government that Pierre Trudeau set up in Canada was designed explicitly to prevent what we're seeing from happening. Explicitly. It was designed to prevent this. It was a kind of a twist on the Marxist concept of the state withering away. So what you do is you take the power out of the partisanship of Parliament and you place it in the civil service, which is supposed to be scientific minded, empirical based. The policies that they make are supposed to be based on, consultation, scientific methods, and they're supposed to come up with answers that are driven by, empiricism, not politics. And so then the state does wither away. So when you hear Justin Trudeau talk about these things using the language that he does, there is some apparent continuity, right? He sounds like he's interested in carrying on his father's legacy. But if you look at his policies, it's happened to be that in the name of his ideals, he's doing exactly what he tried to prevent from happening. Like torturing people in the name of democracy. Think about it for a second, okay? What is less partisan? Is it the civil service, which exists independent of Parliament, has a hiring process based on merit and ability? Or an independent advisory board that was handpicked by the Prime Minister, who is the most partisan person in the country? And so how can you let somebody look you in the eye and tell you that they're creating an independent advisory board by handpicking stooges to replace a neutral process? Unless you just don't understand. And it's the blind leading the blind, okay? I don't want to throw Orwell around because I really don't think that that's what's going on. I will acknowledge that there may be somewhere in his staff of advisors somebody or a couple of people, okay, with a warped sense of humor and a lot of bad intentions. But I don't think that's coming from him. I think his intentions are actually extremely pure. I don't think he's corrupt. I just think he's really fucking stupid, and the people listening to him are as fucking stupid. It's the stupid leading the stupid. Stupid is as stupid does. What Pierre Trudeau imagined was that by this point in time, we would have a civil service that was dominant in society and operated largely independent from parliamentary oversight, with its primary check on power coming from the judiciary. So let the civil service loose, let it do what it's going to do, and if it's going to do something that's not so good, let the judges come in and make that decision. Because when you're talking about complicated, wonky policy decisions, chances are that it's the judge that's going to understand what's right and what's wrong here, and the politicians that probably aren't. I mean, do you hire a clown to build a bridge? Why do you hire a lawyer to run a country? And that is what he thought. In roughly equivalent language. And so that would reduce the parliament to a kind of a monarchist distraction, okay? Responsible for setting the direction of policy, but not the policy itself. So the parliament can tell us that we want to legalize marijuana, but the civil service will deal with it. Because it's the civil service that knows how to deal with it. It's a smart division of labor. He wanted a government run by social scientists and not politicians. Okay, again, it's basically Marxist in concept, and ironically what we're seeing from his son is exactly why he wanted that system. Because he knew that politicians are not good at running countries. And that it doesn't make sense to put lawyers in charge of something that should be run by scientists. If they're even lawyers. Nowadays, half the time they're not. Or more than half the time they're not. House of Commons is actually it's fairly diverse. I think that people inside and outside the country will probably be surprised by the level of expertise that does exist within it, but nonetheless, it's not the right institution to run the state. A parliament filled by elected representatives can tell the experts what people want, but it can't actually do anything. It can't write useful legislation because it doesn't have the expertise to. And I say can't, it never can. The best it can do is go looking for experts to do it for them, which is what the civil service exists for. In a way that is independent from government and non-partisan. He doesn't seem to understand the independence of the judiciary either. Okay. He talks about independence, and his father was very keen on independence, but he doesn't understand what that means. Okay? If you listen to Justin, you can hear that he sat at the dinner table and listened to his dad talk quite a bit. And you do hear the same broad themes from him. But he doesn't understand what he's saying. He demonstrates almost no understanding of the words coming out of his mouth. And his policies uphold the accusation. I'll say it again tersely this time. If you set up an independent body to overrule the civil service, which is actually already independent of Parliament by design, by a smart designer, then what you're doing is abolishing the independence of the decision-making process and concentrating power in the Prime Minister's office. What independent means in context is independent of the independent body, which by definition means dependent on the party. His independent board is the undoing of independence and the reestablishment of dependence. It's a double negative, a double negation. The negation of the negation of. Independent of independent is dependent. So it's literally a direct undoing of his father's legacy, both in practice and in language. But I really think it's legitimately unintentional. He knows the buzzwords. He doesn't know the details. And apparently neither do his advisors. I think that the people that he's got advising him are like experts in like American law. They understand Jefferson better than they understand Trudeau. And then they seem to be trying to construct an American-style system. And the party has to step in and stop them in their tracks. Harshly. It's not Justin, it's his little brother Michelle. That is Justin's mother, Margaret Sinclair, Margaret Trudeau. And that's Fidel Castro. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that that's Jackie O? And RFK Jr. or JFK Jr.? The comparisons were always stupid. And there's Pierre Trudeau and Fidel Castro. One of many photos that exist. In fact, there was a minor fiasco up here in Canada when Fidel Castro attended Pierre Trudeau's funeral as a guest of the family. They really were friends. It's the elder Trudeau. And it's not hyperbole, okay? You hear it, you hear the right, they call Obama a socialist, and it's ridiculous. Obama's a conservative. But Trudeau, he's a democratic socialist. It's a soft branch of Marxism. But I mean, because it's soft doesn't mean it's ineffective, right? He advocated a mixed economy, and he sought the same basic end, which was to have the state wither away on the path to full communism. He just thought that the way to do that was to separate the civil service from the electoral process, and eventually reduce the electoral process to just an empty drama, a political theater. That, I mean, that somebody has to be paying attention, and taking the lessons, but the idea that the parliaments should govern, he thought that was insane. And he's right. It is insane. That any fucking drama teacher out in the street could become the prime minister of the country. He thought that was crazy. His system was very popular here. And I am an advocate of it as an excellent compromise. It's not communism tomorrow. But it's not realistic. Even as an anarchist, I know better. And so it's very sad to see what's happening, but I mean, there's no reason to think it's irreversible. I was 3 years old when he took his walk in the snow. Everything I know about him I've written a book. But I recognize his importance, and I like his contributions. He built the country's constitution. People are going to read his thoughts and his contributions for a long time. And he will have an effect on the country for centuries to come. Much as a Jefferson or a Madison or a Monroe has in the United States. And so we may be in somewhat of a down period of Trudeauvian influence. Or, at the very least, a confused period of Trudeauvian influence. That doesn't mean we can't right the ship, right? Sorry, I just need to clarify the point. Castro wasn't just at Pierre Trudeau's funeral. He wasn't just invited as a family friend and a guest of honor. He was a pallbearer. He carried the casket to the grave. Along with Jimmy Carter. They saw eye to eye on a lot of things. Canada was used as a go-between quite frequently. And in fact, at the end, a big factor, in fact, a lot of people will argue the dominant factor, in Trudeau's resignation in 1984 was that Reagan was honestly and truly convinced that Pierre Trudeau was a communist spy. Reagan tried to get him removed from national security briefings. The Reagan administration saw Canada as a threat to national security. That was a conduit that was of much use to the United States throughout the 1970s because they didn't have relations with Castro. The relations with the Chinese were much weaker. Trudeau also had strong relations with the Chinese government and even with the Soviet Union. And so throughout the Cold War, Canada would often act as a mediator in ways that the United States could not do because they didn't have the documentation. If you go to in the Iran, the hostage crisis in Iran, it was the Canadian embassy that freed the hostages, right? And you can look that up. It wasn't that was in the very short period of time in 1979 where Trudeau was out of office. But what happened couldn't have happened without uh, the fact that Canada maintained an embassy there. Not to suggest that Iran is a socialist country, but you get the point, right? So yeah, a pallbearer. Again, could you imagine Fidel Castro being a pallbearer at JFK's funeral? It's insane.